My son placed a first-class ticket on the kitchen counter and smiled. "Dad, you have been carrying too much. 10 days in Hawaii, just for you." The next morning, he drove me to John Wayne Airport, carried my suitcase to the terminal, hugged me beside the check-in counters, and whispered, "Call me when you land. I will be right here." Then he walked away without looking back. He believed I was 30,000 feet above the Pacific. He was wrong. I never boarded the plane. I ordered a car, waited until my son's SUV disappeared from the airport, and gave the driver an address Julian believed would remain empty for the next 10 days. My own home. My name is Arthur Whitmore. I was 68 years old on that Tuesday morning in May, and before I explain why I returned home in secret, I need to tell you about Margaret. We met in 1981 at a small architecture firm in Pasadena. I had been there 2 weeks. Margaret already seemed to understand the building, the clients, and the blueprints better than everyone else combined. She read structural drawings slowly, as though each line had a moral obligation to hold. I fell in love with her over a parking garage plan. It was not romantic in the traditional sense, but it lasted 41 years. We built our life the way good architects build anything, with patience, intention, and concern for what would remain standing after the scaffolding disappeared. In 1998, we bought a Mediterranean-style house in Newport Coast with terracotta tiles, blue shutters, and a patio that caught the ocean breeze. Margaret chose the shutters. I chose the roof tile. We argued about the kitchen countertops for 3 weeks and laughed about the argument for 18 years. Then pancreatic cancer arrived. Margaret was diagnosed in the winter of 2015. By October, she was gone. I will not describe those final months in detail. Some parts of a marriage deserve privacy even after one person is no longer here to protect it. 2 weeks before she died, Margaret called me to the bedroom and took my hand. "The house stays in your name," she said. Her voice had become thin, but her eyes were still clear. "Do not let anyone talk you into anything different. And take care of Julian." I promised both things. For years, I believed keeping those promises meant giving our son whatever he asked for. Julian was 30 when his mother died. His technology consulting company in San Francisco was failing, but he flew home and sat beside our bed for the last 4 days. Whatever happened later, he was there at the end. Margaret died with her son's hand in hers, and I still believe that moment contained something real. 18 months later, his company collapsed. He called me on a Sunday evening with a careful voice and a new plan. He wanted to move into real estate. He had contacts, ambition, and a business model. What he lacked was capital. I wired him $400,000 from the family trust. It was not the first time. Before the consulting company there had been a restaurant in Silver Lake and an event planning business in San Diego. Each venture arrived with confidence, projections, and a promise that this time would be different. Each time, I said yes without asking the questions Margaret would have asked. Over the following years, my support for Julian's ventures reached more than $1 million. Some of it was properly documented. Some, I later learned, was not. Whitmore Property Group opened in Newport Beach. The office looked legitimate. Julian hired 2 junior agents and began handling luxury listings along the coast. He moved into my house temporarily because the office was nearby and his marriage to Diana had become strained. He said he needed space to save both the company and the marriage. Temporary lasted 2 years. Diana, a third-grade teacher, remained in her rented townhouse closer to her school. She visited occasionally, but Julian always had a reason they could not spend much time together. He said work was consuming him. I believed him because believing him kept the house less lonely. We developed a routine. Coffee at 6:30. Julian left by 8. We ate dinner together several nights a week. He talked about listings, clients, and the coastal market. I listened and felt useful. It was not an unhappy life. It simply was not an honest one. The first crack appeared one Tuesday in March when I entered the kitchen and smelled a sweet floral perfume. Margaret had worn a clean cedar fragrance for 30 years. This scent was younger, louder, and entirely unfamiliar. Julian had supposedly been home alone. I poured my coffee and said nothing. 4 days later, the perfume lingered outside his bedroom after he claimed he had left for an early showing. His SUV was gone, yet the scent remained beneath the door. The following week, I returned early from a doctor's appointment and found Julian's SUV in the driveway beside a bright red Mini Cooper. By the time I crossed the driveway, the Mini was gone. Julian opened the door before I touched my key. "You are back early," he said. Appointment ended early. His collar was rumpled. His expression was perfect. For several weeks, I watched the small details. His phone was always face down. His answers became polished and empty. The perfume returned. One evening, his screen lit before he covered it, and I saw a name: Kayla. He carried the phone into the kitchen and laughed in a low private way I had not heard directed at me in years. "Client emergency?" I asked when he returned. "Something like that." I told myself I was imagining the pattern because the alternative required me to examine every year I had spent protecting him. Then Julian left his laptop open. It was a Saturday afternoon. He had been working at the coffee table when a call pulled him onto the patio. As I crossed the living room, a new message appeared on the screen. The conversation was with Kayla. Her message read, "I cannot wait to see the house." Julian had replied, "Soon. I just need to get him out of the way. 10 days will be enough." Kayla asked, "Are you sure he will not figure it out?" Julian answered, "He trusts me completely. I will book him somewhere far away. He will be grateful. He is always grateful." Above those messages were discussions about the trust, my house, account access, and a lawyer who had apparently explained that inheritance rights could become complicated if I changed the documents before my death. I read the exchange twice. Julian did not merely want privacy with another woman. He wanted me absent while he searched the house, copied records, and prepared to move assets beyond my control. The trip was not yet booked, but the 10-day plan already existed. Through the patio glass, I watched my son speaking on the phone. He had Margaret's hands, long-fingered and expressive. Seeing them produced a grief so precise that I had to sit down. I did not photograph the screen. I did not confront him. I removed my hand from the trackpad and went upstairs. Julian called after me, "Dad, do you want coffee?" "Not right now." My voice remained steady. In my bedroom, I called my older brother, Thomas. He lived in San Diego with 2 dogs and a woodworking shop. He answered on the second ring. "Arthur? I need to tell you something. Let me finish before you say anything." He listened while I described the perfume, the red Mini, Kayla, the messages, and the 10-day plan. When I finished, Thomas was quiet. "I tried to warn you 3 years ago," he said gently. "I know. You said I was jealous of your relationship with Julian. I know that too. I hated being right." At 68, hearing my brother say that made me feel 17 again, not helpless, only young enough to believe that another person knowing the truth made it easier to carry. "What do I do?" I asked. "Call Stephanie Morales tonight. Do not wait until morning." Stephanie had been my attorney for 15 years and had handled Margaret's estate. She was meticulous, direct, and uninterested in comforting lies. I called her at 8 on a Saturday evening. After I explained, she asked 2 questions. "Does Julian know you saw the messages?" "No." "Did you move or alter anything?" "No." "Good. Tomorrow morning, make breakfast and behave as though nothing changed." I looked toward the bedroom door. Downstairs, my son was watching television in a house he planned to inherit through my disappearance. "Can you do that?" Stephanie asked. "Yes." "Do not confront him. Do not accuse him. Do not warn Diana yet. Let me protect the documents and determine what he has already done." After the call, I stood at the window overlooking Newport Coast. The lights formed orderly rows below me. Beyond them, the Pacific moved in darkness. I thought about Margaret asking me to take care of Julian. For 8 years, I had interpreted that promise as an instruction to rescue him. That night, I understood that taking care of someone and protecting yourself from them can become opposite acts. Stephanie called Monday morning. She had already reviewed the trust and the business accounts. "I want to bring in a private investigator," she said. "Marcus Webb. 18 years in family law and asset cases. He will remain in public spaces and document Julian's movements, spending, and connections. Meanwhile, I will examine the trust transfers and secure your ownership documents." "How long?" 3 weeks, perhaps less. Careless people become more careless when they believe the victim is grateful. Marcus was compact, quiet, and dressed in clothes designed to disappear from memory. He asked for Julian's schedule, vehicle information, Kayla's name, and the dates when the red Mini had appeared. Then he began watching. Within days, he photographed Julian and Kayla at an expensive oceanfront restaurant. Their $400 dinner was charged to a card connected to Whitmore Property Group. He documented the Mini outside my home on 4 occasions when Julian knew I would be away. He found a hotel stay in Laguna Beach, also paid through company funds. Public records connected Kayla to a marketing company that had recently received unexplained consulting payments from Julian's business. Stephanie's financial review was worse. The $400,000 I remembered wiring was only the first documented investment. Over the years, Julian had used electronic authorizations to pull additional money from trust-related accounts. Some transfers had my real approval. Others used copied signatures or vague management agreements I had never seen. The questionable total exceeded $340,000, while the full capital exposed through his company approached $1.2 million. 2 of the disputed forms carried Diana's signature as a supposed witness. Stephanie believed the signatures were forged. "Do we tell her?" I asked. "Not yet. If she confronts him before we secure the original files, Julian may destroy evidence. We will tell her when we can protect her." Every morning during those 3 weeks, I made breakfast. I sat across from Julian, asked whether he wanted eggs, poured his coffee, and listened to him discuss clients. He behaved with the easy warmth of a man who believed his father was incapable of suspicion. The performance cost more than I expected. Anger would have been easier because anger moves. Silence sits inside the body and demands to be carried everywhere. One Thursday, Julian looked up from his phone. "You seem better lately, Dad. More relaxed." "I have been sleeping well." He smiled, satisfied. He had mistaken stillness for contentment. He saw exactly the surface he expected and never considered there might be a structure beneath it. Stephanie installed a secure application on my phone. Once activated inside my home, it would upload photographs and audio to an encrypted server at our office within seconds. If Julian took or destroyed the phone, the evidence would remain. "We need his words," she explained. "Marcus can establish the affair and spending. The account records show misuse. But if Julian speaks openly about his intention to control your house or trust, his later explanations become much weaker." "You want me to catch him inside the house?" "I want you to document what he chooses to say when he believes you're gone. Do not provoke him. Do not threaten him. Record, stay calm, and leave if you feel unsafe." At the end of the 3rd week, Stephanie called. "We are ready whenever he makes his move." The move came the next morning. Julian entered the kitchen carrying a glossy brochure. The cover showed a Hawaiian resort with an infinity pool disappearing into the ocean. Beside it, he placed a white envelope. "Dad, you have been carrying too much," he said. 10 days. Private suite, ocean view, no responsibilities. Just trust." Inside the envelope was a first-class ticket from Orange County to Hawaii, departing at 6:45 the following morning. Non-refundable. I looked at the brochure as though his generosity had touched me. "This is thoughtful." Relief moved across his face so quickly it almost resembled love. "You deserve it." That evening, I removed the navy suitcase Margaret and I had bought for Portugal in 2009. Julian expected linen shirts, swimwear, and resort sandals. Instead, I packed dark jeans, a charcoal sweater, a plain jacket, running shoes, a phone charger, copies of identification, and the documents Stephanie told me to keep close. Margaret's photograph stood on the nightstand. Thomas had taken it at a birthday party in 1997. She was laughing with her head tilted back, entirely unguarded. "I promised to take care of him," I whispered. "But you never asked me to disappear for him." Downstairs, Julian spoke softly on the phone. His voice carried the pleasure of a man who believed tomorrow had already been decided. He was right. Only the decision belonged to someone else. Julian was awake before dawn. He had made a full pot of coffee and placed a travel mug on the counter with the lid removed, exactly as Margaret once did when I had an early flight. That imitation hurt more than it should have. "Big day," he said. "Ready?" "Almost." He loaded my suitcase into his SUV. During the drive, he talked about listings, restaurants, and a difficult client in Crystal Cove. His voice filled the car with practiced normality. I watched eucalyptus trees and coastal rooftops catch the first light. "You are quiet," he said. "Early morning." He accepted that answer because it required nothing from him. At John Wayne Airport, he insisted on carrying my suitcase. Inside the terminal, he placed it upright beside the check-in counters and pulled me into a firm embrace. "Call me when you land," he whispered. "I will be right here." I stood inside my son's arms and memorized the moment. I was not saying goodbye to Julian exactly. I was saying goodbye to the version of him I had protected for 8 years, the son who held Margaret's hand at the end, the son who needed another chance, the son I believed would eventually become worthy of her trust. "I will call," I said. He smiled, squeezed my shoulder, and walked toward the exit. He did not look back. I waited until the doors closed behind him. Then I picked up my suitcase, turned away from the airline counters, and walked outside. A silver car waited in the pickup area. The driver had talk radio playing quietly and showed no interest in conversation. I gave him the corner 1 block east of my house, as Stephanie had instructed. As we left the airport, I called her. "You are out?" she asked. "I am out. Julian is gone." Start recording only after you cross the threshold. Your property gives us the strongest basis. Whatever happens, stay controlled. We need evidence, not a confrontation that can be reframed. I understand. 53 minutes after Julian left me at the terminal, my phone rang. Julian. I watched the screen until the call ended. 12 seconds later, he called again. Then a third time. He had calculated the flight schedule. He expected my phone to become unreachable once the aircraft doors closed. Every unanswered call opened a crack in his confidence. By the time the driver reached my neighborhood, Julian had called 11 times. "Busy morning," the driver said. Something like that. I stepped out a block from the house and walked the rest of the way. The ocean air carried faint salt. Sprinklers moved in slow arcs across a nearby lawn. Everything looked ordinary, which felt almost insulting. At the curve, my house appeared. Julian's SUV was in the driveway. Beside it sat the bright red Mini Cooper. I activated the recording application, put the phone in my jacket pocket with the microphone uncovered, and approached the front door. The lock turned with the same clean click it had made for 27 years. Cool air reached me first. Then music. A Norah Jones album played softly in the living room. Margaret and I had danced to that album on the night we bought the house, before the furniture arrived. Julian knew what it meant. Whether he chose it deliberately or carelessly, I could not decide which possibility was worse. Kayla laughed. I stopped in the shadow of the hallway. "Did you check the flight?" she asked. "Twice," Julian said. "Wheels up 40 minutes ago. He is completely gone. I cannot believe he just went." "That is Dad. He trusts me. He has always trusted me." I looked through the doorway. Kayla sat curled on my white sofa with a wine glass in her hand. She was younger than Julian, dark-haired, and entirely comfortable. Her red Mini was outside. Her shoes were beside my coffee table. She was also wearing my navy Oxford shirt. Margaret had ordered that shirt for my 63rd birthday and had my initials stitched inside the collar. I wore it to our final anniversary dinner and later to our funeral. Julian had taken it from my closet and given it to Kayla as though everything inside the house already belonged to him. I remained hidden and listened. Kayla's tone changed from playful to practical. "What does the longer plan look like?" "The trust names me as heir," Julian said. "The house and accounts come to me eventually. It is not a question of whether. It is administration and timing." "He is only 68. His health is not good. He takes medication. He does not sleep. He repeats himself. He loses track of conversations. Nothing has to happen tomorrow. The timeline handles itself." None of that was true in the way he implied. I took blood pressure medication and had occasional sleepless nights after losing my wife. Julian had transformed ordinary age and grief into a preliminary case for incapacity. He continued. "I have been involved in every account and appointment for years. He thinks I am helping. What I am really doing is positioning. When the time comes, I will already be where I need to be." Kayla looked around the room. "The house feels heavy. All these photographs. It is like living inside someone's memory." "That is exactly what it is. Mom has been gone 8 years, but he still talks to her picture. He never moved on. He lives inside the loss and expects everyone else to live there too." Kayla said that sounded heartbreaking. Julian laughed quietly. "It is exhausting. I stopped expecting gratitude. I do what I have to do because eventually the numbers work in my favor." That sentence completed something inside me. I had known the affair was real. I knew about the money. I knew he planned to use my absence. What I had not fully understood was the ease with which he discussed my life as a waiting period. The phone in my pocket warmed as the recording synchronized to Stephanie's server. Julian and Kayla began discussing renovations. They wanted lighter furniture, fewer photographs, and a redesigned kitchen. Kayla disliked the blue shutters. Julian said they could replace them after the title was settled. They were planning their future through windows Margaret had chosen. I had heard enough. I straightened, stepped from the hallway, raised my phone, and took the first photograph. The flash filled the room. Kayla dropped her glass. Red wine spread across the white cushion. Julian turned. For half a second, his face was blank. Then recognition arrived, followed by the total failure of every expression he had prepared for ordinary life. "Dad?" I took another photograph. "What, how are you here?" I did not answer. He moved toward me with one hand raised. "Put the phone down. We can talk." "Take another step and I will call the police. The audio and photographs are already uploading to my attorney. Destroying the phone will change nothing." He stopped. Kayla pressed herself into the corner of the sofa, gripping Margaret's shirt closed with both hands. Julian looked from me to the phone, then toward the front windows. His knees seemed to lose strength. He caught the sofa arm and slowly lowered himself to the floor. "Dad, please. I made a mistake. I will end this today. Kayla will leave. Whatever you need, I will do it. We can fix the company, the accounts, everything." I looked at my son kneeling on the hardwood where Margaret and I once danced. Whether his tears came from remorse or fear no longer mattered. Consequences often produce emotion that resembles conscience from a distance. "You and me," he said. "We can solve this like we always have." "You and me," I repeated. He went silent. "For 8 years, I wrote checks without asking enough questions. I funded businesses built with your mother's money while you spoke as though you had built them alone. I mistook endless rescue for fatherhood. Do not mistake that for weakness. I did it because I loved you and because Margaret asked me to take care of you." His face tightened at her name. "I stood in the hallway listening to you speak about me as though my life were an inconvenience between you and an inheritance. I kept hoping the son who held his mother's hand at the end was still somewhere inside the man on that sofa." I raised the phone one final time. And then I stopped hoping. The flash illuminated Julian on the floor, Kayla against the sofa, the broken glass, the wine, and the shirt that never should have left my closet. Then the room returned to itself. Julian remained on his knees with his hands open on his thighs. "I want to tell you something about your mother," I said. "Not because it will change what happens next, but because you should understand what you tried to take. The year Margaret and I married, she worked 3 jobs. During the day, she drafted plans at an architecture firm that paid her less than men doing the same work. 2 evenings a week, she kept books for a dry cleaner on Colorado Boulevard. Saturday mornings, she arranged flowers because she said it was the only hour of the week that belonged entirely to her. Every dollar she could spare went into a savings account labeled Future. Years later, she was offered a partnership that would have tripled her income. She turned it down because Julian needed a parent at home after school, and she decided it would be her. She never used that sacrifice as a debt against him. I discovered the value of the partnership only after her death. The trust was not luck, I said. It was 30 years of disciplined choices. Your mother named you because she believed you would become a man worthy of what she built." Julian stared at the floor. "She would not have screamed at you," I continued. "She would have grieved. Quietly. Completely. Then she would have decided what came next." For a moment, something unguarded appeared in his face. Then he stood. "You want to eulogize her at me?" His voice rose. "You have been eulogizing her for 8 years. Every room is a memorial. Every conversation becomes a story about Mom. I have been living inside your grief since I was 30. Kayla whispered his name, but he ignored her. "I drove you to appointments. I answered late-night calls. I sat at dinner and listened. I kept the company going while you stayed inside this house talking to a photograph. You never saw me building a life. You saw someone to manage. When does any of this become mine?" The room stayed quiet after he finished. Some of what he said was true. Grief had occupied the house. I had measured my decisions against the wishes of a dead woman because imagining Margaret's approval felt safer than deciding alone. Julian had sometimes carried more of my loneliness than I admitted. But a true complaint does not excuse a forged signature. A neglected feeling does not become ownership. Pain can explain a choice without making the choice acceptable. "You should have told me," I said. "I tried." "You asked for money." "I asked to be seen." "And when you did not feel seen, you planned to take the house." He looked away. I removed a folded document from my jacket. "Section 3 of the Whitmore Trust," I said. "The Newport Coast property was purchased with Margaret's separate inheritance and is titled solely in my name. It cannot be transferred through your company, used as security, or claimed by a contingent beneficiary while I am alive." Julian's mouth opened, but I continued. Section 7 concerns the capital provided to Whitmore Property Group. The company must account for every trust dollar. Unauthorized transfers become a personal repayment obligation with interest. Kayla lowered her feet to the floor. "How much?" she asked. Julian shot her a look. Stephanie's current estimate places the disputed withdrawals at more than $340,000. The total trust capital exposed through Julian's ventures exceeds $1.2 million. Kayla's face changed. Whatever story Julian had told her about imminent wealth had not included immediate debt. Section 11 is the conduct clause, I said. A beneficiary who deliberately acts against the grantor's financial or physical welfare can lose inheritance rights after verified evidence is presented to the trustee. Julian went pale. The recording reached Stephanie while you were speaking. The financial records, Marcus's photographs, the hotel receipts, and Kayla's company payments are already preserved. You set me up. No. I returned to my own house. You supplied the words. You cannot disinherit me over an affair. This is not about the affair. It is about fraud, misuse of trust funds, forged documents, and your plan to control property you do not own. Kayla stood and pulled the shirt around herself. You told me the house was basically yours. Julian snapped, not now. You said the transfer was paperwork. Kayla. You said Arthur had already agreed. I looked at her. Did Julian show you a document with my signature? She hesitated. Julian moved toward her. Do not answer him. I raised the phone. He stopped. Kayla swallowed. I saw a property authorization. He said you signed it after your wife died. I signed no such authorization. She turned toward Julian, and whatever remained of their alliance began collapsing under the simple pressure of accurate information. You have 30 minutes, I said. Take clothing, electronics, and anything that belonged to you before you entered this house. Nothing purchased through Whitmore Property Group leaves until the accounts are reviewed. Julian stared at me. You are throwing your son into the street. I am removing an adult who used my home as a staging ground for fraud. Mom would never do this. Do not use her as a witness against a decision she wrote into the trust herself. That silenced him. I opened the front door and stepped outside. I did not trust myself to stand in the living room while they packed. Stephanie had arranged for Marcus to remain nearby. If Julian attempted to remove records or become violent, help would arrive. On the 11th step down the path, my phone buzzed. A message from Thomas Reed, I'm already on my way. Those 4 words held more care than every polished sentence Julian had spoken that morning. I waited near the end of the driveway. 20 minutes later, Kayla rushed from the house carrying a handbag, a small suitcase, and a bundle of clothing. The navy Oxford was gone from her body. She had changed into her own sweater and left Margaret's shirt folded on the entry table. She did not look at me. Her red Mini backed out first. Julian emerged 8 minutes later with 2 suitcases and a laptop bag. He stopped on the porch. Is this really how you want it to end? No, I said. This is how it ended after what you chose. He loaded the SUV. For 1 second, I thought he might come toward me. Instead, he got behind the wheel and drove away. Thomas arrived 40 minutes later in his blue pickup. He came up the path without hurrying, looked at me, and opened his arms. I stepped into the embrace. Neither of us spoke until we reached the kitchen. You eaten? He asked. Coffee. He made the disapproving sound older brothers reserve for decisions they cannot reverse and began making eggs. We sat at the table where Julian and I had eaten breakfast for 2 years. I described the airport, the return, The recording, the shirt, the conversation, and the trust clauses. Thomas listened with both hands around his mug. "She would have done the same," he said. "Margaret? She would have been quieter. But yes. I hope so. You did right, Arthur." I did not answer. Some statements should be received rather than argued with. The doorbell rang. Diana stood on the porch. She was 36, slight, dark-eyed, and still dressed for school. Her face showed the careful composure of someone who had driven too quickly while trying to prepare for a medical emergency. "Julian called," she said. "He said you came back from the airport confused. He said you were making accusations and might be having an episode." That was the frame he had chosen, not an exposed father, but an unstable old man. "I am not confused," I said. "Come inside. There are things you need to hear." Diana looked past me toward Thomas. He gave her a small nod. At the kitchen table, I placed my phone between us and played the recording. Julian's voice filled the room. "He trusts me. He always has." Then his description of the inheritance, the timing, my health, the house, and his position inside my finances. Diana's hands tightened in her lap. The recording reached the affair. Kayla's laugh. The hotel. The renovations. The plan to use my absence. When it ended, Diana did not ask whether the recording was real. "How long has she been coming here?" Marcus documented 4 visits over 3 months. The relationship may be older. She took one careful breath. "He used my name on something. It was not a question." "Stephanie found disputed forms witnessed with your signature." Diana closed her eyes. "I never signed anything for Whitmore Property Group." "I know." "How much?" "Potentially hundreds of thousands in unauthorized transactions." Her face changed from heartbreak to a colder form of clarity. "May I use your kitchen? I need to call a lawyer." "Of course." She moved to the far counter and dialed. Thomas watched me across the table. Outside, late afternoon light rested on a blue hydrangea Margaret had planted years earlier. Neither of us spoke. The truth had reached Diana, and the consequences were no longer mine alone. After Diana left, Thomas told me to pack enough for a week. He did not ask whether I wanted to leave the house. He looked at my face, read the answer, and said, "Get a bag." I locked the doors, set the alarm, and followed his truck south toward San Diego. Julian began calling before sunset. The first messages were apologies. They were carefully written, as though remorse were another presentation he could prepare. The next messages blamed me for humiliating him, entrapping him, and using Margaret's trust to destroy the company she intended to support. By the third day, the anger disappeared. One message remained. "I am frightened. I do not know what happens next. I am sorry in a way that has nothing to do with consequences." I read it 3 times. Then I placed the phone face down. A sincere sentence does not erase a deliberate plan. It may be the beginning of accountability, but it is not a shortcut around it. Thomas's house stood a few blocks from the water in Ocean Beach. It smelled of coffee, sawdust, and the 2 Labrador retrievers who believed every visitor required immediate emotional support. One dog slept at the foot of my bed. I had not understood how much I missed another living creature breathing nearby until then. On the 3rd afternoon, I drove back to Newport Beach to see Dr. Evelyn Cross. She had been my physician for years and had cared for Margaret during her illness. My blood pressure was dangerously high. "Your heart rhythm is stable," she said, "but your body is treating this week as an ongoing emergency." I gave her the essential facts. She prescribed medication, scheduled a follow-up, and looked at me over her glasses. What your body is doing is not weakness. It is an accurate response to trauma. You confronted a betrayal that would destabilize someone much younger." I said nothing. At the door, Evelyn stopped. "Margaret used to ask whether I thought you would be all right after she was gone." My throat tightened. "I always told her yes," Evelyn said. "I meant it then. I still mean it." I drove back to San Diego with those words resting beside everything else I carried. Stephanie called as I reached Thomas's street. The civil petition was filed. She had moved to freeze disputed business accounts, preserve company records, block any property filing, and invoke the conduct clause in the trust. Diana had retained her own attorney and agreed to provide devices, bank statements, and handwriting samples. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. During that time, forensic accountants traced the money. Julian had used trust-backed funds to cover failing business expenses, personal debt, Kayla's marketing company, hotels, restaurants, and credit cards. He had represented himself to lenders as having future control over the Newport Coast property. He did not own it. He had also submitted 2 financial authorizations carrying Diana's forged signature and 1 property document carrying a reproduction of mine. Marcus provided surveillance records and receipts. Stephanie preserved the laptop message evidence through lawful discovery after the court issued an order. The original conversation showed that the Hawaii trip had been designed to give Julian 10 uninterrupted days to search my files, photograph trust documents, and meet with a lender. The case no longer depended on my interpretation of a private conversation. It had dates, signatures, transfers, metadata, photographs, witnesses, and Julian's recorded voice. Diana met me once before the hearing. We sat in Stephanie's conference room with our attorneys present. She looked exhausted but steady. "I should have known," she said. "No. He lied to both of us in different languages. He told me he was staying with you because your health had become fragile. He said you needed supervision and did not want anyone to know." I almost laughed at the precision of it. Julian told me he lived in the house because his marriage required space. He told Diana he lived there because his father required care. Each lie made him appear self-sacrificing to the person hearing it. "He used your kindness as cover," I said. "He used yours as capital." Neither of us argued. Diana explained that she and Julian had maintained separate accounts after his first failed venture. He repeatedly pressured her to sign business guarantees, but she refused. When lenders demanded spousal acknowledgement, he copied her signature. "Do you want him imprisoned?" she asked. "I want the truth entered into the record. What the law does after that is not entirely mine to decide." She nodded. "I filed for divorce this morning." "I am sorry." "So am I, but I am not uncertain." Before leaving, she placed a small envelope on the table. Inside was a copy of a message Julian sent her after the confrontation. "Dad is confused and dangerous. Do not believe any recording he plays. He has become obsessed with the idea that I am stealing from him." Diana had replied with only one sentence. "Then explain why my signature is on documents I never saw." Julian never answered. That evening, I returned to the Newport Coast house for the first time since leaving. Thomas came with me. Nothing had been stolen. The living room still held the dark wine stain. Margaret's shirt rested folded on the entry table. The album had stopped at the end of the record. I carried the shirt upstairs and placed it in a drawer. Then I opened every window. Ocean air moved through the house, lifting curtains and replacing the trapped smell of wine and perfume. Thomas cleaned the broken glass while I removed Kayla's abandoned cosmetics from the bathroom and Julian's remaining files from the study. We did not throw anything away. Stephanie had instructed us to preserve anything connected to the case. That night, I slept in my own bed. I did not speak to Margaret's photograph. For years, talking to her had helped me survive grief. After hearing Julian mock the habit, silence felt like surrendering something to him. Yet I also understood that he had touched the truth I needed to examine. The house had become fixed in the year Margaret died. I had preserved every room because change felt like disloyalty. The next morning, I moved one chair. Only one. I shifted Margaret's reading chair from beside the fireplace to the window where the light was better. It was a small act. It felt enormous. Protecting a memory, I began to understand, did not require freezing the life around it. The hearing took place in Orange County Superior Court on a bright morning 3 weeks later. Stephanie and I arrived early. Her leather portfolio contained the trust, bank statements, Marcus's reports, the recording, time-stamped photographs, handwriting analyses, and the original electronic records obtained through discovery. Julian entered with an attorney named Derek Holloway. Holloway was broad, polished, and accustomed to creating pressure through volume. Julian walked beside him in a dark suit that no longer fit properly across the shoulders. He looked as though he had not slept. Diana sat behind us in a navy dress. Judge Patricia Okafor entered at 9 precisely. She reviewed the file in silence, then asked Holloway to explain why Julian had represented himself as controlling a property titled solely to his father. Holloway stood. This case arises from a family misunderstanding amplified by grief and an unfortunate private dispute. Judge Okafor looked over the document. Is the trust before me the original notarized instrument? Yes. Does it identify Arthur Whitmore as the primary lifetime beneficiary and owner of the Newport Coast property? Yes, Your Honor. But then your client was not authorized to represent the property as available collateral. Holloway changed direction. He argued that Julian believed he had implied authority because he managed many of my appointments and business matters. Stephanie produced the account documents. Implied authority does not create permission to copy a signature, she said. 2 handwriting experts have confirmed that I did not sign the property authorization. They also concluded that Diana's signatures on the business guarantees were reproductions. Holloway said Julian disputed the characterization of the transfers as unauthorized. Judge Okafor asked, did Arthur Whitmore approve payments to Kayla Sutton's marketing company? No written revocation of management authority existed at the time. That was not my question. I liked her immediately. Stephanie presented the financial timeline. Hundreds of thousands in disputed withdrawals had moved from trust-related accounts into Whitmore Property Group and then into personal expenses, debt payments, and Kayla's company. Marcus's photographs placed Julian and Kayla together at the hotel and restaurants charged to those accounts. GPS and parking records showed her repeated visits to my house. Then the recording played. Julian's voice filled the courtroom. He trusts me. He thinks I am helping. What I am actually doing is positioning. The room remained silent through his comments about my health, the inheritance, the house, the renovation plans, and the belief that the timeline would take care of itself. Holloway objected that the conversation had been recorded without Julian's knowledge. Stephanie argued that I recorded inside my own residence to document suspected financial wrongdoing and that the evidence had been preserved under counsel's direction. The judge admitted it for the civil trust proceeding while noting that any criminal use would be reviewed separately. The photographs followed, Kayla wearing my shirt, Julian in the living room, the broken glass, and the time stamps proving I had returned during the period he represented me as traveling. Holloway called Diana. She walked to the witness stand without looking at Julian. Mrs. Whitmore, he began, during your marriage, did you observe your husband providing substantial care to his father? Yes. Did Arthur sometimes appear consumed by grief? Yes. Did Julian believe he was acting to stabilize the family's financial future? Diana looked toward the judge. I cannot testify to what he believed. I can testify that he forged my name, lied about where he lived, used marital funds during an affair, and told me Arthur was confused after Arthur discovered the truth." Holloway paused. "Do you wish to see your husband financially destroyed?" "No. I wish to stop being used as proof of transactions I never approved." He tried another question. "Would you characterize Julian as a dishonest man?" Diana finally looked at him. "I have nothing to say in my husband's defense." She returned to her seat. Julian's face changed as she passed. Whatever hope he had placed in her loyalty ended without drama. Judge Okafor issued the ruling after a short recess. The Newport Coast property remained entirely mine. Whitmore Property Group was ordered to account for and repay the misused trust capital, with interest applied to unauthorized transfers. The forged authorizations were declared invalid. The trust's conduct clause was triggered. Julian lost all contingent inheritance rights. The court entered a civil finding of elder financial abuse and referred the evidence to the district attorney for a criminal review. Holloway requested additional time. The judge denied it. "This was not a misunderstanding," she said. "A future beneficiary treated a living person's assets as though death had already transferred them. The law does not recognize impatience as ownership." The gavel came down. Julian placed his face in his hands. I gathered my documents and stood. As I passed him, he did not look up. I did not stop. There was no satisfaction in the hallway. I had protected the house and the trust, but the victory contained the loss of my son as I had understood him. Stephanie touched my arm. "You did what was necessary." "I know." Knowing did not make it painless. 2 days later, Kayla left Julian. She packed one bag, drove away in the red Mini, and blocked his number before reaching the freeway. Julian sent me a message. "She left. I do not think she was ever really in it for me." It was perhaps the first honest sentence he had written in years. The sadness was that he could recognize exploitation when he was its target but not when he practiced it against others. I did not respond. Diana's divorce proceeded. Her separate forgery claim sought damages for the use of her legal identity and the risks created by Julian's business guarantees. She returned to teaching while her attorney handled the case. The house became quiet again. At first, the quiet felt contaminated. Every room contained a scene: Kayla on the sofa, Julian on the floor, the recording from the hallway. I began reclaiming the space through ordinary work. I had the sofa professionally cleaned, though a faint shadow of the wine remained if the light struck from the side. I repainted the living room. I moved photographs rather than removing them. Margaret's portrait stayed above the fireplace, but other pictures went into albums instead of covering every surface. I found the slate blue countertop sample she had saved inside a drawer years earlier. I placed it on the kitchen counter and began calling contractors. Thomas visited twice a week. Sometimes we talked about Julian. More often, we discussed wood, weather, dogs, and the fact that one contractor believed arrival windows were a form of fiction. My blood pressure improved. Evelyn said my body had begun accepting that the immediate danger was over. One afternoon, I opened the top drawer of my study desk and removed the drafting pencils Margaret gave me when I retired. They were wrapped in chamois and had not been touched in 4 years. I sharpened one and began drawing. At first my hand was uncertain. Then the old knowledge returned. I did not draw a house or a commercial project. I drew a simple structure, line by line, testing proportion, pressure, and support. I worked until the evening light disappeared. The house was mine. More importantly, the life inside it had started moving again. 3 months after the hearing, Stephanie asked me to meet for coffee in Corona del Mar. The cafe overlooked a narrow stretch of coast. I arrived first and watched pelicans move over the water in slow arcs. For the first time in years, the sight did not immediately connect itself to loss. Stephanie sat across from me and studied my face. You look better. I feel better most days. The house. Still standing. I repainted the hallway. I am replacing the countertops with the slate blue Margaret wanted. Stephanie smiled. Good. She did not mean only the countertops. Then her voice changed. The district attorney completed the preliminary review. They are filing criminal charges against Julian for elder financial abuse and forgery. I looked toward the water. What does that mean? If he contests everything and is convicted, incarceration is possible. More likely, because this is his first criminal case and the civil restitution order already exists, his attorney will negotiate a plea involving felony probation, repayment, financial restrictions, and a criminal record. The information produced no triumph. It felt like the final medical report after a long illness, painful, but clear enough that uncertainty could stop controlling the room. Does Julian know? His lawyer was notified. And Diana? The divorce is moving forward. The forgery settlement is nearly complete. She is back in her classroom. Stephanie removed a cream-colored envelope from her bag. She left this for you. Inside was a card in Diana's careful handwriting. Arthur, you did not have to tell me the truth. Letting me remain unaware would have been easier for you. The fact that you chose honesty is something I will carry. Margaret raised a good man. I am sorry it took this crisis for me to see clearly what her son had become. I will be all right. Please take care of yourself. I read it twice and returned it to the envelope. She will be all right, I said. Yes. A week later, Diana and I met at a cafe near her school. She looked tired but lighter, as though she had finally set down a weight and was still adjusting to walking without it. How are you, truthfully? I asked. Better than expected. Teaching helps. 8-year-olds do not respect personal tragedy when they need help with long division. Margaret said similar things about clients. Diana smiled. Then she asked, when Julian first brought me into the family, did you see what he was? I considered the question. I saw things I chose not to examine. There is a difference between blindness and looking away. I was guilty of the second. Would Margaret have seen it? Sooner than I did. Diana lowered her eyes. She would have liked you, I said. Not because you married Julian. For the right reasons. Tears came quietly. She wiped them away without apology. We discussed her divorce, the settlement, and a summer teaching program in Portland she had postponed for years. Before leaving, I placed an envelope on the table. It contained money from my personal account, not from the trust, not from the lawsuit, and not as payment for testimony. It was enough to cover the program, relocation expenses if she chose to move, and the legal costs Julian had forced upon her. I cannot take this, she said. You can. I have already decided. Arthur. You were deceived by someone in my family. You told the truth when silence would have been easier. Margaret believed people who love us well should not ask us to carry more than we can hold. She would have wanted the next chapter to begin without Julian's debt attached to your ankle. Diana held the envelope in both hands. Thank you. Not only for this. Come back and tell me how the next chapter goes. She left for her classroom. I remained at the table and unfolded another document from my jacket. A flight itinerary. Los Angeles to Florence. One way. No return date. Margaret had wanted to visit Florence since our first year of marriage. She once stood in the kitchen of our Pasadena apartment, pointing at a picture of the Uffizi Gallery and promising we would see it together. We planned the trip twice. A project deadline stopped us once. Julian's childhood health scare stopped us the second time. After Margaret became ill, travel was impossible. After she died, imagining Florence without her felt disloyal. Now I understood that carrying someone with you is different from refusing to move because they cannot. Before booking, I asked Stephanie whether any legal matter required me to remain in California. The criminal case may resolve through a plea. Your testimony can be scheduled if necessary. The civil judgment is final. Nothing legally requires you to stay. Good. Where are you going? I will tell you next time. She laughed, and I realized the smile on my face had appeared without effort. The evening before my departure, I stood at the bedroom window overlooking the valley. Newport Coast shone in orderly rows. Somewhere beyond the dark hills, the Pacific moved as it always had. I thought about the first night in the house. Margaret had leaned against my shoulder and said it felt like the kind of home that would hold people well. She had been right. The house held our marriage, Julian's childhood, illness, grief, betrayal, and the beginning of recovery. It did not remain pure. Homes are not museums of the best things that happened inside them. They carry everything. I placed Diana's card beside Margaret's photograph. I am going, I said softly. I am finally going. For once, speaking to the photograph did not feel like standing still. It felt like saying goodbye before a journey. The next morning, Thomas drove me to Los Angeles International Airport. At the curb, he removed my suitcase and looked at the departure board. Florence, he said. Florence. Return date? Not yet. He nodded. Margaret would approve. She would ask whether I packed sensible shoes. Did you? Yes. Then she would find something else. We hugged. This time, when I entered the terminal, I intended to board. The difference between the two airport mornings stayed with me. The first ticket had been purchased to remove me from my own life. The second had been chosen by me to continue it. Julian eventually accepted a plea agreement. He received felony probation, financial monitoring, mandatory restitution, and a permanent record. His real estate license was revoked. Whitmore Property Group closed. Assets were sold to repay part of the judgment, and monthly payments were ordered for the remainder. I learned these details through Stephanie while sitting in a small rented apartment near the Arno River. Julian wrote one final letter. He did not ask for money. He did not claim Margaret would have defended him. He admitted that he had treated my grief as evidence of weakness, my generosity as permanent access, and his future inheritance as present property. He said losing Kayla, Diana, the company, and the trust had forced him to understand that every relationship he considered secure had been held together by what he expected to receive. At the end, he wrote, I do not know whether I am sorry in a way that deserves anything from you. I only know that I finally understand why you stopped. I kept the letter. I did not answer immediately. Forgiveness should not be confused with restored access. A person can release anger without returning the keys. They can recognize genuine remorse without financing another chance. They can love someone and still refuse to live within reach of that person's entitlement. Months later, I sent Julian one sentence. Understanding is where repair begins, not where consequences end. That was all. In Florence, I walked through the Uffizi gallery with Margaret's old notebook in my coat pocket. I stood before the paintings she had pointed to decades earlier and allowed myself to miss her without treating the missing as an instruction to stop living. I stayed 6 weeks. Then 8. I drew buildings from cafe tables, crossed bridges at dawn, and learned enough Italian to order coffee without accidentally requesting a bowl. I sent Thomas photographs. I sent Diane a postcard for her classroom. I sent Stephanie a picture of a courthouse and told her Italian lawyers had better scenery. Eventually, I booked a return flight. Not because California was trapping me. Because I wanted to go home. The slate blue countertops were installed while I was away. When I entered the kitchen, the color looked exactly right. Margaret had been correct for years, which would have pleased her more than the countertops themselves. I placed fresh flowers beside her photograph, unpacked my drafting pencils, and opened the windows to the ocean air. The house no longer felt like a shrine. It felt occupied by a living person. That distinction changed everything. What I learned at 68 is that love without clarity is not kindness. Sometimes it is permission. For years, I gave Julian permission to take from me because I believed refusing him would dishonor Margaret's final request. I'd treated every failed business as proof that he needed greater support. I'd treated every polished apology as evidence that the next opportunity would be different. I kept rescuing him from the consequences that might have taught him who he was becoming. That was my failure. His betrayal remained his. It is important to hold both statements without using one to erase the other. Parents often believe acknowledging their mistakes requires accepting responsibility for every choice their adult children make. It does not. I could have asked better questions, set limits earlier, and recognized the pattern sooner. None of that forced Julian to forge signatures, misuse trust money, deceive his wife, or plan his future around my removal. Compassion should improve our judgment, not replace it. I also learned that family betrayal rarely arrives looking like an enemy. It carries coffee into the kitchen. It asks about your sleep. It drives you to appointments and calls the control help. It buys a first-class ticket and smiles while telling you that rest is what you deserve. The danger is not always in the action itself. Sometimes it is in the intention hidden beneath something generous. That does not mean every gift should become suspicious or every relative should be treated like a potential thief. It means independence deserves structure. Important documents should be reviewed by someone who does not benefit from them. Accounts should have clear records. Estate plans should define what happens during life, not only after death. A promise made to someone you love should never become a weapon used against your own safety. Margaret understood that when she insisted the house remain in my name. I understood it years too late, but not too late to protect what remained. The house still stands above Newport Coast. The blue shutters are freshly painted. The slate countertops catch the morning light. Some photographs remain on the walls, but not enough to make every room answer only to the past. I still speak to Margaret occasionally. I no longer apologize for it. Julian had used that habit to describe me as pathetic and absent from the present. For a while, his words made me ashamed. Then I realized grief does not become illness merely because a dishonest person finds it useful to call it one. The difference is whether memory accompanies your life or replaces it. For years, mine had come close to replacement. Florence helped me change that. So did drawing again. So did moving one chair, repainting one wall, and choosing one journey for myself. Recovery did not arrive through a courtroom ruling. The ruling protected my property. Recovery came through ordinary decisions made after the danger passed. It came when I made coffee without wondering who had touched the account that paid for it. It came when I slept through the night. It came when I opened a letter from Julian and did not feel compelled to solve his life before finishing the first paragraph. It came when the house became quiet without the quiet feeling like abandonment. Diana completed the teaching program in Portland. She later sent me a photograph of her standing beside a group of teachers, smiling with the uncomplicated pride of someone who had chosen a future rather than inherited one. Her divorce became final. She kept the Whitmore surname for the remainder of the school year because changing classroom records would have created confusion, then returned to her family name. Thomas continued calling every Sunday. He never asked whether I regretted what I had done. He asked whether I was eating, drawing, and remembering to take my blood pressure medication. Older brothers understand that survival often depends on questions too ordinary to sound important. Stephanie remained both my attorney and, though neither of us announced it, my friend. She revised the trust so that no single relative could control my finances if I became incapacitated. 2 independent medical opinions would be required, along with review by a professional trustee. The house would eventually support an architectural scholarship in Margaret's name. Julian would not inherit it. That decision was not revenge. Inheritance is not a reward owed for biological connection. It is a final act of trust. Julian had demonstrated that giving him control would place both the property and other people at risk. I chose a different future for what Margaret built. The scholarship would support students who had talent, discipline, and too little money to enter the profession. Margaret spent much of her career being paid less than man whose drawings she corrected. She would have appreciated the symmetry. On the anniversary of her death, I placed the first scholarship announcement beside her photograph. "You were right about the countertops," I said. "And several other things." The house was silent. I smiled anyway. I do not know whether Julian and I will ever have a relationship that deserves the words father and son. We exchange occasional letters through boundaries I control. He has repaid part of the judgment and works outside real estate. His messages have become shorter and less interested in explaining. That may be growth. It may also be patience directed toward another strategy. Trust, once damaged, should not be restored merely because time has passed. Time is not evidence. Behavior is. So I watch what he does without arranging my life around the possibility that he will become someone different. That is freedom too. If I could speak to the man I was before the perfume, the Mini Cooper, and the open laptop, I would not tell him to stop loving his son. I would tell him to stop using love as a reason not to look. I would tell him that questions are not cruelty. Boundaries are not abandonment. A locked account is not an accusation. And being grateful for help does not require surrendering the right to know what the helper is doing. Most of all, I would tell him that a parent's life does not become advance inheritance because a child has begun imagining how to spend it. Julian thought 10 days would be enough. 10 days to search my office, copy the trust, meet a lender, bring Kayla into my home, and begin turning my absence into control. He believed the first-class ticket made the plan look loving. He believed I would call from Hawaii, thank him, and remain grateful while he measured the rooms for a future without me. Instead, I walked back through my own door. That choice did not save every relationship. It saved the part of my life that was still mine to live. Sometimes justice is a courtroom ruling. Sometimes it is a forged document declared worthless. Sometimes it is an account frozen before the money disappears. And sometimes justice is much quieter. It is an older man standing in Florence before a painting his wife once dreamed of seeing, understanding that the people who tried to remove him from his life did not succeed. It is a return ticket purchased only when he wants to come home. It is a kitchen changed without the past being erased. It is a house that still holds memory but no longer holds him prisoner. The first time Julian drove me to the airport, he told me to call when I landed and promised he would be waiting. He was not waiting for me. He was waiting for my absence. The second time, Thomas drove me. He did not promise to wait. He simply hugged me and trusted that I knew where I was going. That is the difference between control and love. Control needs your future to follow its plan. Love allows you to choose a direction it did not design. I finally boarded the second plane. I carried Margaret's notebook, Diana's card, and a life that had become mine again. And when the aircraft lifted above California, I looked down at the coastline, watched the houses shrink into patterns, and felt no fear about what someone might do while I was gone. The documents were secure. The accounts were protected. The keys belonged to me. More importantly, so did the decision to return. That was the inheritance I kept for myself.